Hello and welcome to this art tutorial, and mostly welcome to part 7, Natural Language Processing. So what is natural language processing all about? Well, it's about analyzing texts. These texts can be books, reviews, some HTML web pages that you extract from web scraping, all sorts of texts, and therefore natural language processing is a branch of machine learning where we do some predictive analysis on text mostly. So in this part, these texts are going to be reviews, written reviews of restaurants. And so we will make some machine learning models that will predict if the review is positive or negative. So this is a simple example of an application of natural language processing, but the algorithm we'll make in this part will be very well applicable to other kinds of texts. You'll be able to apply this on books, for example, to predict the genre of a book, whether a book is a thriller, a comedy, or a romance. You'll be also able to use it on HTML web pages to do whatever kind of analysis you want to do on these pages. You can also apply it on newspapers, to predict in which category an article belongs to. Well, you'll see that we'll make a general model that you'll be able to apply on most of the text. And of course, if you need to apply this on a more complicated text, you can ask me some questions in a Q&A, and I'll tell you what to add to make this code work properly for your problem, your text. Okay? So let's start this. Let's start our algorithm. And before starting with the first code section, let's do the basic step. Let's set the right folder as working directory. So we'll go to our machine learning AZ folder, then part 7, natural language processing. So congratulations for reaching that part. You are now entering into a very useful and exciting branch of machine learning. So let's go in there, and now we have to pick the section natural language processing. So here we go. That's the folder we want to set as working directory. So now we'll click on this more button here and then set as working directory. All good. And now, as you can notice, in this folder that we just set it as working directory, we have two data files. We have a restaurantreviews.csv file and a restaurantreviews.tsv file. So I left these two data files on purpose because there is an important thing to understand when we prepare text data sets that I would like to highlight and show you right now. So I'm going to go to my folder on my computer and we'll have a look at these two files from there. So right now I'm going to my folder. Here it is. And let's open the two restaurant reviews CSV. So open with text edit. Here we go. And restaurant reviews.tsv. So same, open with text edit. So that's the CSV and that's the TSV. Let's first have a look at the CSV. As you can see, the first line here is the title of the future columns we're going to have in RStudio. The first column is review and the second column is liked. And I can see that because these two terms here are separated by a comma, and this is a CSV file, meaning that all the columns are separated by a comma. So that's the first line containing the titles of the columns. And then we have all our observations. So one line corresponds to one observation. And as you can see in each of these lines, we first have the review. So this is, of course, a review of a restaurant. So, wow, love this place, meaning, of course, that the review is positive. And therefore, in the second column, the liked column, we have a 1 here, meaning that the review is indeed positive. So the variable for this liked column can take two values, 1 or 0, and 1 means that it's a positive review, and 0 means that it's a negative review. So indeed, as you can see, in the second review, crust is not good. Well, of course, that's a negative review, and therefore there is a 0 here. All right, so that's actually the kind of file we're used to, because since the beginning of this course, we've only been using some CSV file where the columns are separated by a comma. But here we have something different. We can see that we have the same columns. First column is review, second column is liked, and we have the same reviews. So these are exactly the same data sets with the same data, But there is one major difference, and as you might have guessed, this difference is the delimiter. In this file here, the delimiter is a comma, so that's the delimiter separating the two columns, and in this file, the delimiter is a tab, and that's why we call it TSV, tab separated values vs CSV, comma separated values. And so now, according to you, which one should we choose for our future algorithm? You know, we'll have a machine learning algorithm analyzing all the reviews here, and then the goal of this algorithm will be to predict whether the review is positive or negative. Alright, but now the question is, do we need a data set where the columns are separated by a comma or by a tab? Well, the answer is, as you might have guessed, by a tab. And why is that? It's because we already have some commas in the reviews itself. Well, for example, this one. This review is the food, comma, amazing. So if we use our CSV file where the delimiter is a comma, well, we'll have a problem for this review here because for this particular observation, the first column will contain the food here. So R will think it's a review, the food, and the second column will not be 1 here, but amazing, because there is this comma here that is taken for the delimiter, and therefore it will separate the food and amazing. And therefore what will happen to 1? It will go to the next observation, and therefore 1 will be taken for a new review. So that will not make any sense, and this will mess up with the whole algorithm. And that's why it's way better to take tabs here, because you know, when people write reviews, they do not put tabs in the review. Well, that would be very rare. They would put comma very easily, as we can see for this particular review, and we can find other reviews with commas, I'm sure of it. Yes, indeed, we have another one here. This place is not worth your time, comma, let alone Vegas. So it's very natural to put some commas in the reviews, but not much natural to put some tabs in the reviews. And besides, if you press on tab when you're writing a review, well, this will go to the next, you know, button to like submit your review or something else. But by pressing the tab button when you're writing your review, you would get out of the review and you would not be able to continue to write it. So we will never find a tab in the review, and that's why we will never have this problem of getting these anomalies due to duplicate delimiters in one specific review. So I really recommend to prepare your text datasets this way with a tab separator, because you will never have that kind of problem. One other solution if you really want to use a CSV would be to include some double quotes here, one at the left of the review and one at the right, but you would still get some problems in case you have some double quotes in the reviews itself. I'm sure we can find one. Let's have a look. Let's press Command F to find a double quote. Here we are. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. For example, let's have a look at this review here. The description said yum yum sauce. Well, that's because this person here is quoting a description found somewhere. And so since it's quoting, it's using some double quotes here, yum yum sauce, and another one here. So even if you put some double quotes to separate your reviews from the result, that is 1 or 0, well, you would still have this kind of problem. Whereas if you separate your review and the liked variable by a tab, you will never get this kind of problem because no one will press tab by writing a review. So definitely that's the one we'll go for, restaurant_reviews.tsv tab separated values. And by the way, this is a dataset taken from a paper from group to individual labels using deep features by Coetsias et al. So we will use this dataset, and this contains 1000 reviews, and for each of the review we have the real result 0 or 1. So let's do it. Let's start implementing our algorithm, and we will start with the first step, that is to import this dataset restaurantreviews.tsv into RStudio. So let's do it. Let's close this and let's go back to RStudio. Alright, so now let's import the dataset. So As usual, we're going to call our dataset this way, and then equals, and then that's where we use a function to import the dataset. However, so far, we've been using the read.csv function to import our datasets because simply our datasets were CSV files, but as we just understood, this time we're not dealing with a CSV file, we are dealing with a TSV file. So of course, things might be different now. But we will still type read.csv here, and then some parentheses, and then let's press F1 here to get some info about this read.csv function. So what do we see? First, we see that we don't only have one import function. Indeed, we can see here that we have the read.table function, which we haven't used yet, the read.csv function, which is the function we've been using since the beginning of this course. Then we also have the read.csv2 function, which is the same as this one, with the only difference that the default separator, the delimiter that is separating your columns, is a semicolon instead of a comma as the default parameter for the read.csv function. So that's the main difference between the two. But that's not what we are interested in right now, because we would like to use a function where the default parameter for the separator is a tab and not a semicolon. We could still use this read.csv function and change the sep parameter, but let's use another function for once to import the dataset with the right default parameter. And speaking of this default parameter, which should be the tab separator, well, that's actually the next import function, which is the read.delim function. Indeed, you can see here that the default parameter for the separator is a tab. /t here means tab actually. So that's exactly the function we want. That's the best function to use for our dataset right now, because our dataset contains columns separated by a tab. So that's the function we'll use. So I'm going to remove here read.csv and replace it by read.delim. Here we go, and now we input the parameters. So it's the same principle as for read.csv. We of course need to input first the dataset in quotes, and the dataset is called restaurant reviews.tsv. So we need to specify this because indeed in our working directory folder we have the two files, CSV and TSV, so we need to specify here TSV. That's the first parameter, and then we have some other parameters like this header parameter here, which is by default equals to true, meaning that it considers the first line of our dataset as the titles of the columns, which is the case for our dataset, because remember, the first line is review tab liked, and review is the title of the first column and liked is the title of the second column. So we're good with this header parameter, so we don't need to input this. And same for this next parameter sep, because by default the parameter for the separator is a tab, and that's exactly what we need right now. And then we have this parameter quote, and that's a very useful parameter to input for natural language processing, because most of the time you'll find some quotes, most of the time double quotes in your text. We checked that we had some in our reviews, and so we need to ignore these quotes because we don't want to have some kind of misinterpretation when our read.delim function reads all the reviews. So in general, in natural language processing, it's better to ignore any kind of quotes. We did exactly the same in Python and everything went well. So we'll do the same here, and to do this, we add this quote parameter and we set it equals to actually nothing in quotes. By putting nothing in this quotes here, that means that it's ignoring any kind of quotes in the text. So that's good. And now we'll add a last parameter that is not specified here, and which is the strings as factors parameter. And what is this parameter used for? Well, the first column of our dataset contains the written reviews, And you know, in R, when we're making some classification models, which will be what we'll be doing here in natural language processing, because basically we'll be classifying new reviews and tell whether they are positive or negative. So that's classification. And you know, when we're doing some classification models and working with some categorical variables, well, remember we use this factor function to specify the categorical variables as factors. And you know, right now we have some reviews. And since in some way it's not a numeric variable, you know, taking some continuous real values, well, in some way it can be considered as a categorical variable having some different factors. But in natural language processing, we must not identify the reviews as factors in R. And that's because we will analyze the inside of the reviews, because we'll be analyzing the different words of the review to understand the correlations between the presence of the words and the result, whether the review is positive or negative. So since we'll drill into the review and analyze its content, well, we must not specify the review as factors as if it was a single entity, because that's what a factor would be, a single entity having a single meaning regardless of the different meanings of the different words of the review. And so to prevent from identifying those reviews as factors, well, what we need to do is add this other parameter, which is the string as factors parameter. Here it is. I just need to press enter. And now we just need to input false like this, not in quotes, and that will not identify the reviews as factors. And that's all. That's how we should import this text file, you know, using the readDelim import function to import a TSV file by default, and then add this quote parameter to ignore the quotes, and then add this string as factors parameter to prevent from identifying the reviews as factors. All right, so let's do it. Let's select this line of code and execute. All right, all good. Our dataset is well imported. As you can see, it has 1000 observations. That means that the cut between the review column and the liked column was done very properly without any issue. So now let's open our dataset and let's have a look. As you can see, all the reviews are very well separated to their verdict, whether it's a positive or negative review. And so everything here looks great. And we need to make sure that we have our 1000 reviews. Well, we can see that here very easily, but you know, we have our 1000 reviews, and when I scroll up, we can see that all the reviews are well in the review column, and all the liked results 0 or 1 are well in the liked column here. You see, if I scroll up, we don't have any review in the like column or a 1 or 0 in the review column. So everything looks great. We are ready to move on to the next step, which will be to clean the different reviews. That is a compulsory step in natural language processing, which consists of cleaning the text to make it ready for our future machine learning algorithms. So that's what we'll do in the next tutorial, and